The church that shouldn't exist. Have you ever taken a road you've never traveled before, only to realize you've passed the same place again and again? What if the road wasn't leading you somewhere? What if it was keeping you there? Tonight's story is inspired by one of the strangest legends whispered throughout the remote hills of Tennessee, a tale about an abandoned church that does not appear on any map, does not exist in any county records, and yet somehow continues to be found by those unfortunate enough to wander too far into the wilderness. A church where every road leads back. A church where something waits behind the altar. And a church that may not want visitors, but never lets them leave. Before we begin, welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy horror stories, dark mysteries, unexplained disappearances, haunted locations, and terrifying legends from across America, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let tonight's nightmare begin. In October of 2023, 5 friends set out on a journey into the remote mountains of eastern Tennessee. Their goal was simple: find abandoned locations to film for their growing YouTube channel. Ethan, the group's leader, had spent years exploring forgotten places alongside his friends Marcus, Olivia, Tyler, and Hannah. Together they had investigated abandoned hospitals, crumbling prisons, old schools, and deserted mines. Most of the places they visited turned out to be ordinary ruins with ordinary explanations. Strange noises were usually caused by animals. Ghost sightings often became shadows once viewed from another angle. Yet they continued searching, convinced that one day they would discover something truly unexplainable. That opportunity seemed to arrive when Olivia received a mysterious email. The message came from an unknown sender and contained only a single sentence: "Find the church at Black Hollow Road before it finds you." Attached was a blurry photograph of an old white church standing alone in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. The building looked ancient. Its paint was peeling, several windows were broken, and its bell tower leaned slightly to one side. Yet what disturbed Olivia wasn't the church itself. It was the forest behind it. The trees appeared unnaturally dark, as though they absorbed the sunlight around them. At first, everyone assumed the photograph was fake. Tyler laughed it off immediately, claiming someone had edited the image to create a creepy story. But Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that it was real. She spent the next week researching old maps, church registries, newspaper archives, and county records. Eventually, she discovered a newspaper clipping from 1937 that mentioned a church near a place called Black Hollow. According to the article, the building had been destroyed by a lightning strike and burned completely to the ground. No remains survived, and the road leading to it gradually disappeared from official maps. If the article was accurate, the church in the photograph should not have existed. 3 weeks later, curiosity got the better of them. The group loaded their equipment into Ethan's truck and drove deep into eastern Tennessee. As the hours passed, civilization slowly disappeared behind them. The roads narrowed, the forests thickened, and cell service became unreliable. By sunset they arrived in a small mountain town that seemed untouched by time. There was a single gas station, one diner, and a handful of scattered houses. When Ethan showed the photograph to a waitress at the diner, her reaction immediately caught their attention. The woman stared at the image for several long seconds before quietly handing it back. "You should leave that alone," she said. When Ethan asked why, the waitress glanced around nervously before lowering her voice. She explained that people around the area avoided talking about Black Hollow. Every few years, someone would go looking for the church, and many of those people returned with strange stories. Some claimed they lost entire days of their lives. Others insisted the roads changed while they were driving. A few never returned at all. Before walking away, the waitress left them with a warning they would never forget. "The church burned down a long time ago," she whispered. "But people still find it." The following morning, the group followed a series of vague directions gathered from local residents and eventually located what remained of Black Hollow Road. The road was little more than a cracked path swallowed by the forest. Tree roots pushed through the pavement, and thick branches formed a canopy overhead that blocked much of the sunlight. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, the forest grew darker and strangely silent. Tyler launched a drone into the air, hoping to locate the church from above, but the live feed showed nothing except endless miles of trees stretching toward the horizon. After several hours of searching, frustration began replacing excitement. The church seemed impossible to find. Finally, Ethan suggested turning back. No one objected. They climbed into the truck and began driving toward the highway. Nearly 20 minutes later, Marcus suddenly sat upright in his seat and pointed through the windshield. The church stood ahead of them. Everyone froze. It was identical to the building in the photograph. The leaning bell tower. The peeling white paint. The broken windows. Every detail matched perfectly. What made the discovery even more unsettling was the fact that none of them had passed the church earlier. They were certain of it. Somehow the building had appeared on a road they had already traveled. The church sat alone in a clearing surrounded by towering trees. No nearby houses. No cemetery. No signs of human activity. Just the building and the forest. The moment they stepped from the truck, an uneasy silence settled over the area. There were no birds singing. No insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed absent. The forest felt frozen in time. Marcus immediately began filming while Ethan approached the entrance. The front doors hung slightly open, revealing only darkness inside. Olivia checked her GPS but found the device frozen. One by one, the others checked their phones. None of them had a signal. Tyler laughed nervously and blamed the mountains, but nobody seemed convinced. As they prepared to enter, Hannah suddenly stopped and stared toward one of the church windows. Her face had turned pale. "What is it?" Ethan asked. "I thought I saw someone," she whispered. Everyone looked, but the window revealed nothing except darkness. Still, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been watching them from inside. The old wooden doors creaked loudly as they pushed them open. Dust covered nearly every surface inside the church. Rows of weathered pews faced a small altar beneath a sagging ceiling. Despite its age, however, the building seemed strangely preserved. It did not look like a structure that had supposedly burned down nearly a century earlier. Marcus swept his flashlight across the pews and quickly noticed something carved into the wood. Every bench contained the same message scratched repeatedly into its surface. "Do not follow the road after dark." The warning appeared hundreds of times. Some carvings looked recent. Others seemed decades old. Olivia felt a chill run down her spine as she read the words. Tyler attempted to joke about it, but even he sounded uneasy. Then they noticed something else. Above the altar hung a large wooden cross. It was upside down. The atmosphere inside the church changed immediately. What had once felt merely abandoned now felt wrong. Not haunted in the traditional sense. Not evil. Just wrong, as though the building itself violated some natural law. Marcus moved his flashlight toward the altar and spotted a small trapdoor hidden beneath layers of dust. The door was secured with a heavy rusted lock. It looked as though someone had intentionally sealed whatever lay beneath the church. The group spent the next hour documenting everything they could find. They photographed the carvings, recorded footage of the altar, and explored every room in the building. Yet the deeper they investigated, the stronger the feeling grew that they were not alone. Then Tyler checked his watch. His expression immediately changed. "Guys," he said quietly. Everyone looked toward him. "It's almost 6 o'clock. At first no one understood why that mattered. Then Marcus checked the timestamps on his camera footage. A knot formed in his stomach. According to the recordings, they had arrived at the church shortly after noon. Nearly 6 hours had passed. The problem was that none of them remembered being inside for more than an hour. Silence filled the church as the realization settled over them. Somehow, an entire afternoon had vanished. No one could explain where the missing hours had gone. No one could remember what had happened during that time. For the first time since arriving at Black Hollow, the excitement of discovering a mysterious location disappeared completely. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. And as the sun began sinking behind the mountains, the group finally made a decision. It was time to leave. However, none of them yet realized that finding the church had been the easy part. Leaving it would be something else entirely. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the distant Tennessee mountains, the 5 friends quickly gathered their equipment and headed back to the truck. The strange loss of time had unsettled everyone. What had started as an exciting adventure now felt deeply wrong. Ethan tried to reassure the group, suggesting that they had probably become so absorbed in filming that they simply lost track of time. But even he didn't sound convinced. 6 hours had vanished without explanation, and none of them could remember what they had been doing during most of that period. The uncertainty lingered like a weight in the air as they climbed into the vehicle. The truck's engine roared to life, shattering the unnatural silence surrounding the church. Ethan turned the vehicle around and began driving back down Black Hollow Road. Nobody spoke. Marcus occasionally glanced through the rear window, watching the abandoned church disappear behind the trees. For a brief moment, relief began to settle over the group. The road ahead appeared normal, and soon they would be back on the highway. They could find a motel, review their footage, and figure out what had happened. Everything would be fine. Then Hannah suddenly leaned forward in her seat. Her eyes were fixed on the road ahead, and her voice trembled as she spoke. "Ethan, I don't think we're going the right way." Ethan frowned. They had been driving in a straight line the entire time. There were no turns, no intersections, and no side roads. Yet as the truck rounded a bend, everyone in the vehicle froze. Standing directly ahead of them was the church. The same church. The same leaning bell tower. The same broken windows. The same weathered white walls. For several long seconds, nobody said a word. Ethan slammed on the brakes, causing the truck to skid slightly before stopping. The group stared through the windshield in disbelief. They knew they had left the church behind nearly 20 minutes earlier. There was no possible way they could have returned to it. Yet there it stood, exactly where it had been before, waiting for them. Marcus was the first to speak. His voice was barely above a whisper. "That's impossible." Tyler nervously laughed and shook his head, waiting for someone to explain what they were seeing. Nobody could. The road behind them was the same road they had traveled moments earlier. There had been no opportunity to turn around. No hidden paths. No alternate routes. Somehow, the road itself had brought them back. Determined to prove that there was a rational explanation, Ethan turned the truck around once again. This time he paid close attention to every detail. Marcus kept his camera recording continuously. Olivia carefully observed every landmark they passed. For nearly 30 minutes they drove through the darkening forest. The sun disappeared completely, leaving only the fading glow of twilight beyond the trees. Then, without warning, the forest opened into a clearing. The church was there again. A wave of panic swept through the vehicle. Hannah began crying. Tyler cursed loudly under his breath. Olivia repeatedly checked her phone despite knowing there was no signal. Ethan's hands tightened around the steering wheel. The road was no longer leading them away from the church. It was leading them back. Again. And again. And again. Refusing to accept what was happening, Ethan accelerated. The truck raced through the narrow forest road as branches scraped against the sides of the vehicle. The headlights illuminated the darkness ahead while the trees blurred past. 10 minutes became 20. 20 became 30. The forest seemed endless. Then the road curved sharply to the left. The church appeared once more. This time nobody reacted with shock. The fear had already settled deep inside them. Ethan slowly brought the truck to a stop, and for a moment everyone simply stared at the building. Then Marcus noticed something that hadn't been there before. The church doors were closed. When they had left earlier, the doors had been hanging open. Now they were shut. A chill spread through the truck. None of them had returned to the building. Nobody else should have been there. Yet someone, or something, had closed the doors after they left. As they continued staring, Olivia noticed movement near one of the windows inside the bell tower. Her heart immediately skipped a beat. Standing behind the glass was a tall, thin figure. Its shape resembled a person, but it was too distant and too dark to make out any details. The figure stood perfectly still, watching them. Olivia whispered for the others to look. One by one, their eyes found the shape in the tower. Then lightning flashed across the distant mountains. For a fraction of a second, the entire clearing was illuminated. The window was empty. The figure had vanished. The darkness returned, and nobody moved. The only sound was the low rumble of the truck's engine. Then, from somewhere within the church, a bell rang. The deep metallic tone echoed through the forest. Everyone stared toward the bell tower. Another chime followed. Then another. Slow. Heavy. Ancient. The horrifying part was that they had already seen the tower earlier. There was no bell inside it. The structure had been completely empty. Yet the sound continued, rolling through the trees like a warning carried by the night itself. When the final chime faded away, silence once again consumed the forest. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed absent. It felt as though the entire world had stopped breathing. Marcus swallowed nervously and muttered that they needed to leave immediately. Tyler demanded to know how. Nobody answered because nobody knew. Every road led back to the church. Then Hannah noticed something beside the clearing that made her blood run cold. A wooden fence post stood near the edge of the road. Earlier it had been blank. Now fresh carvings marked its surface. The cuts looked new, as though they had been made only moments ago. Hannah slowly stepped closer, her flashlight trembling in her hand. 5 names had been carved into the wood. Ethan, Marcus, Olivia, Tyler, Hannah. Directly beneath the names was a message. A message none of them had seen before. The road has accepted you. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Terror settled over them as the meaning of the words became clear. Whatever existed within Black Hollow knew exactly who they were. It knew their names. It knew they were there. And somehow, it had been expecting them. Then the bell rang again. This time the sound did not come from the tower. It came from somewhere inside the church. Much closer. Much louder. The group slowly turned toward the building. As they watched, the church's front doors began to creak open by themselves. Very slowly. As if something inside had finally decided to invite them in. The old wooden doors continued to open inch by inch, releasing a long, agonizing creak that echoed through the silent clearing. None of the 5 friends moved. They stood frozen beside the truck, staring at the darkness beyond the entrance. It was impossible to see more than a few feet inside. The beam from Marcus's flashlight seemed to vanish the moment it crossed the threshold, swallowed by a blackness far deeper than ordinary shadow. Every instinct told them to get back into the truck and leave, but they had already learned a terrifying truth: the road would not let them escape. For several moments, the clearing remained silent. Then a voice drifted from inside the church. It was faint. Almost impossible to hear. Yet every member of the group heard it clearly. Someone was whispering their names. One after another. Ethan. A pause. Marcus. Another pause. Olivia. The voice continued until it had spoken all 5 names. The sound was neither male nor female. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing through the church walls, beneath the ground, and among the trees surrounding the clearing. Hannah immediately stepped backward, tears forming in her eyes. Tyler looked physically ill. Marcus gripped his camera so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Nope," Tyler muttered. "Absolutely not." He climbed into the truck and slammed the door behind him. The others quickly followed. Within seconds Ethan had started the engine and shifted into reverse. The truck backed away from the church, tires kicking up dirt and gravel. Nobody looked toward the building as they sped down the road. Nobody wanted to see whether something was standing in the doorway watching them leave. For nearly 40 minutes they drove through the darkness. The forest seemed endless. The road twisted through the mountains, winding between towering trees that blocked out the moonlight. Every so often Marcus checked the GPS, hoping for a signal, but the screen remained frozen. Olivia attempted to call emergency services repeatedly, yet every call failed before it could connect. Then Hannah spoke. "Do you guys hear that?" Everyone fell silent. At first there was nothing. Then they heard it. A distant bell. The same bell from the church. Slow. Steady. Relentless. The sound should have been impossible. They had been driving for nearly an hour. The church should have been miles behind them. Yet the bell seemed just as close as before. Dong. 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 Each chime echoed through the forest. Each chime felt closer than the last. Marcus glanced through the rear window and immediately felt his stomach drop. Headlights illuminated something far down the road behind them. A building. White. Tall. Familiar. "The church," he whispered. Everyone turned. Far in the distance, standing in the middle of the road itself, was the church. No clearing. No forest around it. Just the church. Following them. The sight lasted only a second before the road curved sharply and the structure disappeared behind the trees. Nobody spoke. Nobody could. Because they all knew what they had seen. The church was moving. Ethan pressed harder on the accelerator. The truck surged forward. Branches scraped against the windows. Gravel flew from beneath the tires. Yet no matter how fast they drove, the bell continued ringing somewhere behind them. Dong! 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 Then suddenly the engine died. The truck rolled forward in silence. The headlights flickered. Once. Twice. Then darkness swallowed everything. For a few moments the group sat motionless inside the vehicle. Outside, the forest had become completely black. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving them trapped in a darkness so deep it felt almost solid. "Ethan," Olivia whispered. "I know." He turned the key again. Nothing happened. The engine remained silent. The bell stopped ringing. An even more terrifying silence replaced it. Then a new sound emerged from outside. Footsteps. Slow footsteps crunching across the gravel road. Someone was approaching. The group listened in horror as the sound grew closer. Crunch. 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 The footsteps circled the truck. They stopped beside Hannah's window. Nobody dared look. The figure remained there for several seconds. Then the footsteps resumed. Crunch. 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 Slowly moving around the vehicle. When the sound reached the front of the truck, Marcus couldn't resist any longer. He raised his flashlight and pointed it through the windshield. The beam illuminated the empty road. Nothing stood there. The footsteps continued anyway. Circling them. Moving around the truck without any visible source. Hannah began sobbing. Tyler repeatedly whispered prayers under his breath. Olivia covered her mouth to keep from screaming. The invisible footsteps completed another circle around the vehicle. Then another. Then another. Suddenly they stopped. The silence that followed felt unbearable. For nearly a minute nothing happened. Then a loud knock struck the driver's side window. Everyone screamed. Ethan jerked toward the sound. A pale hand was pressed against the glass. The skin looked gray and waterlogged, stretched tightly over unnaturally long fingers. Dirt filled the cracks around the fingernails. The hand remained motionless for several seconds before slowly sliding downward and disappearing from view. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Then another hand appeared on Marcus's window. Then another on Hannah's. Then another. And another. Within moments dozens of pale hands covered the truck from every direction, pressing against the glass as though something outside was trying to get in. The vehicle shook. Not violently. Almost gently. Like someone rocking a cradle. The windows began to fog. At first Ethan assumed it was caused by their breathing. Then he noticed words appearing on the inside of the glass. Letters slowly forming in the condensation. As though an invisible finger were writing them. The message appeared one letter at a time. "Open the door." The group stared in terror as the final word completed itself. For several seconds, nothing else happened. Then every hand outside vanished simultaneously. The truck stopped shaking. The fog on the windows disappeared. The forest fell silent once again. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, beyond the reach of their dead headlights, a church bell rang. Just once. A single deep metallic chime. Immediately afterward, the truck engine roared back to life on its own. The headlights flickered on. The road ahead became visible once more. And standing less than 50 feet in front of them was the church. Not at the end of the road. Not in a clearing. But directly in the middle of it. Waiting. Its front doors wide open. As though it knew they had nowhere else left to go. The engine's sudden return to life should have brought relief, but none of the 5 friends felt anything except dread. The headlights illuminated the church standing directly in the middle of the road, blocking their path completely. It should not have been possible. A building that large could not simply appear in the middle of a narrow mountain road without destroying the surrounding forest. Yet there it stood, silent and motionless, its open doors revealing only endless darkness within. Ethan's hands trembled on the steering wheel as he stared through the windshield. Every logical explanation had long since disappeared. Whatever was happening in Black Hollow obeyed rules far different from the ones they understood. For nearly a minute, nobody spoke. The church seemed to be waiting. The forest remained unnaturally silent, and even the air felt heavy, as though the night itself were holding its breath. Then Marcus noticed something strange. The carvings on the church doors were different. Earlier, the weathered wood had been cracked and faded with age. Now fresh symbols covered both doors from top to bottom. They twisted and curved in patterns that hurt his eyes when he tried to follow them. Some resembled letters from forgotten languages. Others looked more like claw marks than writing. The longer he stared, the more certain he became that the symbols were moving ever so slightly beneath the beam of his flashlight. Tyler was the first to break the silence. He demanded that Ethan drive around the church. Ethan immediately agreed. The truck slowly rolled forward and veered toward the trees on the right side of the road. However, as the headlights swept across the forest, a horrifying sight emerged. There were no trees. The entire forest beside the church had vanished. In its place stretched an endless black void. It looked less like darkness and more like an absence of reality itself. There was no ground, no vegetation, no horizon. Just emptiness. Ethan quickly turned the wheel in the opposite direction, hoping to pass the church on the left side instead. The result was exactly the same. Beyond the road existed nothing at all. A terrible realization settled over the group. The road was the only thing left. Everything else was gone. The church stood at the center of a world that had somehow been reduced to a single stretch of pavement and an ocean of darkness. Olivia's breathing became shallow as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She looked down at her phone once more, expecting the same frozen screen she had seen all evening. Instead, the display was active. A notification had appeared. Her heart nearly stopped when she read it. The message contained only 3 words. "Come inside now." There was no sender. No phone number. No timestamp. Just the message. When Olivia showed the others, their expressions immediately darkened. One by one, they checked their own devices. Every phone contained the same message. "Come inside now." Then another notification appeared. And another. And another. Within seconds their phones were flooded with identical messages, arriving faster and faster until the screens became unreadable. The devices began vibrating violently in their hands. Then all 5 phones shut off simultaneously. The darkness inside the church seemed to deepen. Somewhere beyond the doorway, a faint light flickered. At first it resembled a candle. Then a lantern. Then dozens of lanterns. Slowly, warm golden lights illuminated the church interior. What the lights revealed made Hannah scream. The pews were no longer empty. Every bench was occupied. Hundreds of people sat inside the church. Men. Women. Children. All dressed in clothing from different eras. Some wore modern jackets and jeans. Others wore styles that looked decades old. A few appeared dressed in fashions that belonged more than a century in the past. Every single person sat perfectly still. Every single face was turned toward the altar. And every single one of them remained motionless. Like statues. Or corpses. The group stared in horror as the congregation slowly began turning their heads. One after another. Row by row. Hundreds of faces rotated toward the entrance. Toward the truck. Toward them. Their eyes appeared completely black. Not dark brown. Not shadowed. Black. As if each eye socket contained a hole leading somewhere far deeper than the church itself. The congregation smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not even a human smile. Their lips stretched far too wide. Far enough to split the skin at the corners of their mouths. Marcus dropped his camera. The device struck the floor of the truck with a loud crack. Nobody bothered picking it up. Everyone was staring at the church. At the impossible crowd waiting inside. At the black-eyed figures watching them from the pews. Then a movement near the altar drew their attention. A figure emerged from behind the pulpit. Unlike the others, this one was extraordinarily tall. Its head nearly touched the ceiling. Its body was concealed beneath a long black robe that hung unnaturally still despite the breeze moving through the open doorway. Slowly, the figure stepped forward. Its face remained hidden beneath the shadow of a hood. The congregation immediately lowered their heads. As though bowing before it. The tall figure raised one pale hand and pointed directly toward the truck. A deafening bell rang. The sound exploded through the night like thunder. At the same instant, every member of the congregation stood up. Hundreds of bodies rose together in perfect silence. Then they began walking toward the entrance. Not running. Not rushing. Walking. Slowly. Deliberately. As though they knew escape was impossible. Ethan reacted immediately. He slammed the truck into reverse and pressed the accelerator to the floor. The vehicle shot backward down the road. For several seconds, the church shrank in the distance. Hope briefly returned. Then Marcus looked into the side mirror. His blood turned to ice. The church wasn't getting farther away. It was getting closer. The truck continued speeding backward, yet the church seemed to glide along the road after them. The congregation remained visible through the doorway, still walking forward with slow, synchronized steps. No matter how fast the truck moved, the distance between them never changed. The bell rang again. And again. And again. Each chime louder than the last. The windshield suddenly cracked. A thin fracture spread across the glass. Then another. Then another. The entire windshield began splintering beneath an invisible pressure. Hannah screamed as dark liquid started seeping from the cracks. At first she thought it was oil. Then she realized it was blood. Thick black blood. It flowed across the glass from the outside, forming words as it moved. The message appeared slowly. Letter by letter. You were invited. The bell rang once more. The church doors widened. And somewhere inside the darkness beyond the altar, something enormous opened its eyes. The moment those enormous eyes opened in the darkness beyond the altar, every bell fell silent. The forest, the road, and even the church itself seemed to freeze in place. For a brief second, the five friends felt as though time had stopped. Then a blinding light erupted from inside the church, forcing them to shield their eyes. A deafening roar echoed across Black Hollow, shaking the truck so violently that the windows shattered. Ethan lost control of the vehicle, and everything disappeared into darkness. When Ethan finally regained consciousness, sunlight was shining through the windshield. Birds were singing. A cool mountain breeze drifted through the broken glass. Confused and disoriented, he slowly sat up and looked around. The truck was parked on the side of an ordinary road. There was no church. No black void. No congregation. Just the quiet Tennessee forest stretching in every direction. One by one, the others awoke, equally confused and terrified. None of them could explain what had happened during the night. Desperate to leave, they drove until they reached the nearest town. The locals were shocked by their appearance. Their clothes were torn, their faces pale, and every one of them looked as though they had not slept in weeks. But the most disturbing discovery came later that afternoon when they finally regained cell service. According to their phones, calendars, and news reports, they had not been missing for a single night. They had been gone for 23 days. None of them remembered those missing weeks. Authorities searched the area around Black Hollow Road, but they found no church, no clearing, and no evidence that such a building had ever existed. The coordinates recorded by Marcus's camera led investigators to an untouched section of forest where no structures had stood for generations. Eventually the case was dismissed as a combination of exhaustion, exposure, and mass hallucination. The five friends never publicly spoke about the experience again. Their YouTube channel disappeared several months later. Every video they had recorded at Black Hollow was corrupted beyond recovery, except for a single frame hidden among thousands of damaged files. The image showed the church standing in the darkness exactly as they remembered it. In the doorway stood the tall hooded figure. Behind it, hundreds of black-eyed faces stared toward the camera. And scratched across the bottom of the image, as though carved directly into the film itself, was a message that none of them had recorded. The road always brings them back. Years have passed since that night, yet stories continue to emerge from the mountains of Tennessee. Hunters, hikers, and travelers occasionally report seeing an old white church deep within the forest where no church should exist. Most dismiss it as a trick of the light or a local legend. But a few claim something stranger. They say that if you find yourself on a lonely road after dark and hear the distant ringing of a church bell, no matter how far you drive, no matter how many turns you take, the road will eventually lead you back to the same place. Back to the church. Back to the open doors. Back to whatever waits in the darkness beyond the altar. And if one day you happen to discover an old photograph of a forgotten church with no name and no location, do yourself a favor. Do not go looking for it. Because some places are abandoned for a reason. And some churches were never meant to exist at all.